What's up, guys? My name is Fari, and I build systems that remove bottlenecks within businesses. And I've been documenting my builds since the 1st of June 2025, going all the way up to the 1st of June 2026. And in today's video, I'm going to be going through why asking for feedback is so important and how I'm using this as fuel to ultimately build into what we're building now and also into the future. And this is one thing that I've taken into stride, recently, which is ultimately understanding how feedback plays a role in terms of what you're building. And I've spoken countless times about this, especially referring to the video where I spoke about the strategic advisory board and how I was thinking of integrating and implementing the strategic advisory board in terms of running the feedback loops and also creating leverage through that in terms of the things that we are building, such so that we're building right and also making sure that what we're building is still true to our nature, yet also being valuable as well to the market. And this is something that has hit me over the past week, where I was just facing this time where we were saying, hey, when we were getting messages like, hey, sorry, we're not interested at the moment, or hey, we already have a team and we already have XYZ doing this. And that ultimately hit me. It hit me when we got those messages that, hey, there's so much leverage that we're missing out simply through these conversations that we can ultimately take and then implement a system that ultimately finds commonalities, or pattern recognizes things that are within those messages, and also the context as well, such so that we can use this to ultimately build into what we're building, such so that we can also run these feedback loops and also make sure that what we're building and how we're also approaching ultimately is refined. And I realized that most leverage is ultimately lost through those conversations where someone is like, hey, I'm not interested. And one of the things that hit me, and I still to this day don't fully understand why, which is, even if someone says, no, I don't want XYZ, they're still willing to give you feedback to say, hey, this is the reason why I said no, and you can ultimately take this feedback in order to understand how to move on into the future. And this is where all the leverage is, in my personal opinion. And especially last week I really realized that this is a really powerful tool that we can ultimately integrate, but the missing part from this is ultimately a system that ultimately functions around this or is built around this. And this is why I basically said to myself that, hey, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to build a system within the next couple of hours that ultimately runs solely just for feedback loops, in terms of finding common ground, or basically recognize patterns in terms of things that people are saying, hey, we're not interested, and really diving deep into why they're not interested, and then also auto tagging that as well, such so that we have those inputs, we're able to process them, and then we can see a trend within those messages and conversations, such so that we can then predict into the future what we need to refine and also improve on. And I think data points, like I've mentioned countless times in my videos, are super important, simply because they allow you to have that data that you can ultimately use to power how you're building and also how you're thinking about building as well. Because there's so many things that you miss simply from just saying, hey, we're not going to take the data, or this person said no and that's the end of it. It's, hey, this person said no, let's ask them, why did you say no? Like, why was this not the right time? Why was this product not what you needed right now? Or why did you not say yes now, but you would have said yes later? And fully just understanding that, and also building a system around that ultimately allows you to then somewhat gather that information and then be able to leverage it, such so that you can deploy it into how you're building. Because in as much as you can build from your own mind and in your own space, there's so much context and so much data that you can ultimately get from having those conversations and simply just asking why didn't this work, and why didn't this feel right at this moment in time. And you surprisingly get so much feedback back to say, hey, this didn't work for XYZ reason, simply because I felt like, hey, your manner of approach was not right, or this wasn't just the right time for us because we're not at that stage yet. you ultimately get those data points such so that it allows you to then move forward into the future and ultimately build better, and then creating an interface, basically a dashboard where you can ultimately see these metrics, and also have AI also find common catchphrases such so that you can also auto tag based on that, and also just keeping that data in the centralized hub. And through this is something that I ultimately am using and now have built in order to build that context layer as well, because there's so many layers that this ultimately feeds back into in terms of execution, and also messaging and positioning as well. So it's not just, hey, this ultimately fits into one layer of what we're doing, but it also fits into a number of different layers, such so that we need to understand how we're going to then categorize the different layers that it fits into and how it also fits into it. I think that is one of the most important things that I want to take on into the future, in terms of lessons that I've learned recently, that it's so important to have a system that ultimately powers how you're able to then absorb this knowledge, similar to the Fari OS or the Knowledge OS that I've spoken about in the previous video, but somewhat dedicated to running these feedback loops specifically for context and also execution as well, and also building around this, which I know sometimes we're gonna probably get wrong, but ultimately, as long as we build it and we take action, and we also just refine it as time goes on, then we're able to then find out, hey, this worked, or hey, this didn't work, and why it didn't work. And I think just asking questions as well is also super important. I'm a big believer in asking the first principles route of asking why 5 times, and really driving deep into why things are the way that they are, and from understanding why things are the way that they are, you basically reason up from there, and then you ultimately build around that. And that's why I think it's so much, it's so important, in as much as you can have conversations and you can have these different things, to have a system and different mechanisms that allow you to then capture this and also deploy it in different execution, in different layers, such as your execution, your context, or even your knowledge base execution layer, or which is basically the same thing. But essentially, just making sure that you're having these inputs, these inputs which are your raw conversations, your raw feedback, and then you're processing them through this machine, such so that you can 10x your output simply from the data that you've basically been able to gather. And also just making sure that each and every single day you're building around this and using this context in order to build whatever it is that you're building, and also making sure that you're taking steps each and every single day, which sometimes you may get wrong, and that's okay. It's just how much are you doing, and just moving forward each and every single day, so that you can refine it into the future. And yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to connect with me on the X, LinkedIn, Instagram. I will definitely make a video around this pretty soon, maybe tomorrow, in terms of just going through this, so you can have somewhat of a visual tie into this and how it ultimately functions, because there's some certain parts that I haven't gone through, but I will go through once we just dive into the Airtable, and I can basically just go through it in much more depth and detail. So yeah, if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to connect with me on X, LinkedIn, Instagram. My newsletter is the first link in the description. You can also check that out. So yeah, I will see you guys in the next video.